What is it about snakes that just makes them synonymous with horror? It seems more than any other animals, snakes and spiders are just ones that people get crazy phobias for. They just see those little guys squirming around and they flip out like they're a wife in a Tom and Jerry cartoon. And yes, breeds of snakes can be insanely dangerous, and it probably derives from an evolutionary reaction of people mistakenly getting bitten by snakes they didn't know were there, or spiders they didn't know were there, and over time growing a natural fear of seeing anything that resembles them to prevent it from happening again. But they're just all over horror. In so many horror movies, there's scenes involving snakes, or movies entirely about snakes, or movies about snake people, the mixture of human and snake. It's a very popular concept throughout all of human history, and I'm going to take a look back at films and try to find what the best snake person film is. Now, there are a ton of movies that have horror-like scenes with snake people. Some are amazing, like the insane special effects from Ray Harryhausen of the Medusa scene in Clash of the Titans, or the Thulsa Doom ceremony scene in the original Conan the Barbarian with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Those are great snake person scenes, but they're not snake person horror films. The whole movie isn't built around the horror of a snake person. So we're going to be talking about movies where the main villain is a half-snake, half-human hybrid, is turned into a half-snake, half-human hybrid, or can go back and forth between human and snake. Now, there's tons of these kinds of movies, so I'm not going to be able to cover all of them. I'm just going to cover a select few that I think stand out in my personal mind. The oldest one that comes to mind for me is from 1961, The Snake Woman. This movie is sort of your run-of-the-mill 50s, 60s horror fare. It's got a bit of a unique identity, though. It takes place in the English countryside, and there's not a ton of shots of cottages and fields and forest and all, but when they're there, it does a really good job of painting a picture of the setting. There's a lot of pubs, a lot of small cottages. You really get a picture of like, okay, this is old England. This film starts off with a scientist who's working with snakes and snake venom and has a wife who's passing away from illness. He creates a serum with venom to protect her unborn baby, and when the baby is finally born, she's this cold-blooded, unblinking baby that everyone calls a demon. The mother dies just from taking one look at the baby, and most people get riled up and run off and start the angry mob you've seen from Frankenstein 100 times, and they all come to this place to burn it down to the ground and kill the baby. But the man who delivered the baby feels sorry for it. He drops her off with a shepherd who lives in the countryside. Several years pass, and she's grown up into a young adult, and now she's still living with the shepherd at the time, but lots of deaths start popping up around in the forest and the countryside of people getting poisoned and bit by snakes. We get a main character who's kind of bland and a little unlikable, but he has a romantic interest in her and she has a romantic interest in him, mostly because he plays a snake charmer flute and that's what she likes. But he gets close with her. People try to tell him that she's the snake person and he doesn't believe them, but then ultimately he finds out she is and he has to kill her. I say he's unlikable because he just doesn't seem to value life that much unless he cares about it. There's a scene where he first meets her and a snake is slithering through the grass. He pulls out a gun to like shoot the snake and she freaks out and saves it. And he starts getting mad, like, you almost sound like you value this thing's life. And it's like, alright, that makes you pretty unlikable, man. You don't value the life of any creature other than humans? That's kind of messed up. So, he's kind of unlikable in my book as a reptile lover from that point on. The movie is well made, it is competently made, and it's not a bad flick, but I do feel like it's a little slow. There's a lot of scenes where the characters are just kind of sitting around and drinking and talking, and like just to get the main character his flute, it's like a 5-minute scene of dialogue just going over everything we already kind of know. So it is a very slow film, but it is also a very short film, so you'll get through the movie relatively easily. I'd recommend it to someone who likes classic horror, but I don't think it's the best example. Next, there's Night of the Cobra Woman from 1972. This was filmed in the Philippines, and it's kind of a mixed bag, because in some ways it's a goofy, campy horror film with silly effects of this woman getting these lifeless snake eyes and shedding her skin and all this stuff, and it's kind of goofy in some ways, but then it's also really dark and shocking in others. Like, there's a really disturbing scene at the beginning where a woman is raped and then shot by a man in the middle of a field, and it's just really disturbing. Luckily, Lena, the main character, or villain, or whatever you want to call her, goes into a cavern, meets this, like, one-of-a-kind cobra that when it bites her, it gives her eternal youth and mixes her with snake DNA. And she comes back with that cobra and finds her friend who was raped and shot, and she actually revives her with the snake. And, like, it doesn't really revive her, just gets rid of the wound and makes her, live forever like her. But the thing is, they can only stay young humans forever by having sex with men, which sucks the youth out of them. The men get old and deranged and deformed, and they retain their youth and beauty. So Lena's doing this throughout the film, but it's kind of strange because she also wants to reach a point where she can just be a snake. Because that's the thing, if they don't do this, they just turn into snakes. But then she also has to do this to reach that point, I believe. But then by doing this, she just stays a youthful human. So it's kind of like counterproductive to her purpose. If she just wants to be a snake, then why do you keep going out of your way to become a young human? But if you have to do that to become a snake permanently, it's so backwards. Like, it doesn't make any sense. This main character called Duff shows up, and she is toying with him. She seems to like him. She falls in love with him, and he's being, drained. But then she wants to, like, turn him into a snake too, but he doesn't want to become a snake, and it's really bizarre. I wouldn't say it's a very good movie. It goes for a lot of, like, disturbing, shocking stuff, and I don't think it adds to the film. I think it actually makes it worse. There's something that really bothers me. There seems to be a lot of animal cruelty in the movie, and I really, really hope that it's not actually happening, because there's a scene where an eagle is fighting a snake, and it really looks like the animals are actually hurting each other. I don't know how well you can train an eagle or a snake to act in a movie, so I really, really hope that no animals were hurt, because if any animals were hurt in the making of this film, I would just say do not support it, do not watch it in any way, shape, or form. All in all, I don't think this one's very good. I feel like it's one of those kind of crappy, lowest common denominator kind of movies. Lena's an okay villain. I think she's interesting enough, and her lair is actually really cool, like her underground cavern altar. That's cool, but everything else in the movie is not that great. There's kind of a weird Quasimodo henchman character she has, which is odd. It seems to be played to be disturbing, but everything in the movie just wants to be kind of shocking and disturbing, and I don't think it really is that good a movie, to be honest. It's definitely memorable. You usually don't forget this film, but it's also not very good. But also in the 70s, we had yes, that's the name of the movie, just it's 7 S's in a row, that's all. They even tried to make an advertising gimmick out of it in the trailers. It's like, don't say it, hiss it.
Don't say it, hiss it. Don't say it, hiss it. Don't say it, hiss it.
What the hell are you doing here? Get out! Get out! Get out! Get out!
This movie's pretty famous, or more so infamous, among B-movie fans, people who love, campy, crappy horror films. It has quite a reputation of just being a ridiculous film. So in this movie, there's a scientist who's working to turn human beings into cobras, and it's not really a snake person film per se, because he's saying he's going to make like the ultimate life form, like a mix between snake and man. And we do see like a failed experiment of his that is actually a snake man in a traveling circus. But when we actually get the scene at the end where he transforms the man into a snake man, it's just a cobra. It's just a real live king cobra. It doesn't act intelligent. It doesn't act like any more intelligent than a regular king cobra. It's like you just turned a guy into a king cobra. I don't really get what the purpose was. It doesn't really seem that impressive a feat because it's just a snake now. Like, it's not this super soldier like you said it was going to be. It's a really odd film. It's very campy. It's very just funny in how ridiculous it is. But it's... Unfortunately, I'd say it's not good. But unlike Night of the Cobra Woman, I would say this one is actually a good watch. This one is a lot of fun. You will laugh your ass off if you like cheesy B movies. There's really not too much more to say about this film because it's just such a goofy, stupid movie. But, like I said, I'd recommend it. It's fun. It's fun bad. Speaking of movies there's not that much to say about, but are memorable enough to mention, Hammer put their hand in making a snake person movie with The Gorgon, which, as you know, Medusa was one of the Gorgon sisters, so this is basically a Medusa horror movie. It's probably the reason the Medusas show up in the Castlevania games, as many of the monsters in the original NES Castlevania were meant to be homages to Universal Monsters and Hammer horror. So I think this film is actually the reason why Medusa is so common in Castlevania, regardless of the fact that she is just a famous monster in history. But originally they were really banking on the film theme in the original Castlevanias. But this movie is incredibly dull. I usually love Hammer. I love the settings. I love the, aristocratic locations, all the manors and stuff, and castles. And usually it has like a very cool, regal, but also gothic and creepy kind of atmosphere. But this one is just so boring. I remember the first time I watched this, I could not keep myself awake. And when you do finally see the Gorgon, the effect is not Hammer's best. I mean, you think of some of the other makeup jobs they've done. This one is clearly just like a woman wearing some crappy makeup with some plastic not moving snakes in her hair and stuff. It's, again, not even funny bad. It's just boring bad, I would say, this one. It's not the worst movie ever. It's a competent film. It's just terribly boring. So there's really not that many good snake person movies. There's a lot of them. There's probably like 40 or 50 snake person horror movies I haven't even mentioned or watched. But there's not that many good ones. But there is one really damn good one from the 80s called Lair of the White Worm. A lot of people hate this movie, but I absolutely love this film. I think it is hilarious. And yes, it was clearly meant to be hilarious. It is so obviously a comedy movie. Yes, it's a horror film, but it is meant to be a silly, ridiculous comedy horror. It's just not as on the nose as something like Scary Movie, which is a parody. It's not a parody. It's just in that the characters in the film think they're in a serious horror film, but the things that happen are so ridiculous and so many of the lines are so funny that we as the audience should be able to realize it's a funny film. I don't like that mentality usually of acting like, oh, I got it. The rest of you who hate this movie must be idiots. You don't understand clever humor or anything. I hate that attitude because no, if you didn't like the movie, you're allowed to not like the movie. If you didn't find it funny, you're allowed to not find it funny. But I do just feel it is so obviously comedic. But if you read critics' reviews of this film, they all act like they have no idea if it's meant to be funny or if it's meant to be serious and scary, where even the director says, like, it's very clearly supposed to be funny. He thought it was obviously meant to be funny. Like, come on, even just the fact that the evil Mistress Sylvia, the snake woman, villain of the movie, plays snakes and ladders with people that she invites into her house by the fire, and the young Hugh Grant, who stars as the hero of the movie, or one of the heroes of the movie, for some reason he's rocking a pretty serious unibrow in this movie. Even asks her, like, if you're terrified of snakes, which she claims to be to throw people off and not suspect her for being a snake woman, then why do you torture yourself playing snakes and ladders? And she's just like, I don't know. I guess it's just dabbling with fear that excites me. It's just ridiculous. She invites in a Boy Scout and like kills him in the bathtub and just steps on it and pushes him into the water. When she's gonna sacrifice the girl at the end of the movie, she comes in wearing a snake fang as a strap-on, and she's gonna like, you know, have her way with her before she feeds her to the giant worm. The fact that the guy Angus, the Scottish character, played by an ultra young Peter Capaldi, out of nowhere at the final climax of the movie just becomes the most badass like action star ever. He's carrying a hand grenade in his kilt pouch and all this stuff, and he's just playing Snake Charmer music on bagpipes, and like, it's just insane. He has a mongoose on him. Like, it's a pretty hilarious movie. It's obviously a joke. I mean, if any scene can justify the fact that this movie is a joke, it's probably Hugh Grant's dream he has on the airplane. It is so ridiculous. If you can watch that scene and still think this movie's not meant to be funny, I don't know, man, this movie's just not for you then. There's also another great comedic moment where they play Snake Charmer music, like blasting from the stereos, because they live like, Hugh Grant lives like right next to Lady Sylvia's place. And as they're playing it, Lady Sylvia is just like sleeping in a basket like she's a snake. And she comes out and she just starts walking out to the music. Like as she's walking, she's like dancing all sexy and stuff. She's like overtaken by the music. It's ridiculous. Lady Sylvia is one of the greatest horror villains. I'm so sad she doesn't get celebrated as much as the others. You know, for most of the movie, she has her human dominatrix disguise, but then at the end, we see her in her true form, where she's a blue, sexy, naked snake lady. We also get glimpses of that during crazy, like, acid trip flashback scenes that with no context throughout the movie. I don't know, this movie has become a film that I just love watching. I watch it almost every year around Halloween, actually, now, because it's just a ton of fun. I always love watching this film. It's hilarious. It's super creative. It is based on Bram Stoker, the author of Dracula's final writing, which was Lair of the White Worm, but it takes many, many liberties. Even the whole character of Lady Sylvia was just basically created and exaggerated for this movie to be the main villain. But the plot revolves around four main characters, four young people: Angus, the Scottish guy, Hugh Grant's character, who's supposed to be the descendant of the original person who slayed this famous fabled monster in the area called the White Worm, a giant serpent. And, you know, he's super rich just because he's a celebrated hero because of his family history. And then their two love interests. They discover a strange skull in the ground, which ultimately belongs to the original White Worm. Lady Sylvia shows up and takes the skull because she wants to revive the White Worm through a ceremony, and she needs that to do so. The rest of the movie is basically just a hunt of the characters just trying to find a way to stop this from happening and find out who everyone is and what is going on. And ultimately leads to the scene I mentioned earlier about Angus, where he goes in and, you know, takes out everybody. Hugh Grant's character is just going to the caves below, and he's like really like nowhere near the castle when he's in the caves. But like he kind of gets all the credit as being the hero, even though Angus is the one who like kicked all the ass. But it's hilarious, you know. Sylvia, she turns one of the policemen into like a snake man, and he's like a henchman of hers, and his death is ridiculous. The acting is just hilarious across the board. Like Hugh Grant is hilarious and how dry he is, and it's just a really, really, really good movie. I can't stress enough how great this movie is. Sylvia deserves to be one of those celebrated horror villains like Jason or Freddy Krueger or Pinhead or Leprechaun. She deserves to be getting, you know, action figures and merchandise. She's so cool looking, and she's so funny, and she's so fun. She's such a likable character. She is one of the greatest villains in horror comedy. I think so. You also gotta love the little Irish folk song they made about the Dampton worm that plays at the party at the beginning of the movie and then again in the ending credits. Super catchy. So without a question, I would say Lair of the White Worm is the movie to check out. It is amazing for what it is. I highly highly recommend it. And I really hope it gets more of a following over the years. It might have a bigger following in England, I'm not sure, because that's where it's from. But I don't believe so. I think it's generally just, kind of on the down low. Like, people don't really know about it. Or if they do know about it, they just know the reputation it has of being a bad movie with tonal issues or something, which it totally is not. So I really hope this film gets the love it deserves. I hope Lady Sylvia gets the love and respect she deserves as a great horror icon. Just go watch this movie. It's the best snake person movie ever made. I swear. Check it out. Well, that's all for tonight. I hope you enjoyed looking at all these snake people movies. Again, there's so many, I couldn't get all of them. But I picked out specifically the ones that stick out the most in my head. So I hope you enjoyed it. Have a great one and stay spooky. Do all the liking and subscribing and the sharing and the bell stuff.